The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
The Burn of the Unseen. January 8th, 1981, cast a pale, wintry glow over the rolling hills of Tranquil province. A quiet village in southeastern France, nestled among vineyards and lavender fields. The air was crisp, tinged with the faint sweetness of damp earth and the tang of olive groves, a stillness settling over the countryside as the sun hung low in a cloudless sky. Dubois, a 55-year-old farmer with weathered hands and a stoic demeanor, trudged through his terraced garden near the Var River, inspecting his alfalfa crop. His boots crunched on frost-kissed soil, his breath fogging in the chill. The only sounds the distant bleat of goats and the rustle of wind through the cypress trees lining his property. At 5 p.m., as dusk crept in, the wind shifted, a soft breeze turning sharp and erratic, whistling through the branches with a high, piercing edge that made pause. His dog, a wiry mutt, named froze mid-step, ears pricked, growling low at the sky. Quest, c'est quoi, c'est passe, muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold, when a sound cut through the silence, a low, resonant thrum-thrum, like a heartbeat pulsing from the earth itself. It grew louder, rattling his teeth, and the air thickened with a metallic tang like burnt copper that stung his nostrils. He glanced upward, shielding his eyes, and saw it, a shape descending from the west. Not a plane or helicopter, but a flattened, oval object, 8 feet wide, its surface a dull lead grey that swallowed the fading light. It hovered 20 feet above his garden, silent save for that drone, its underside glowing faintly red along a ringed edge. The wind howled now, a shrieking wail that bent the cypresses and sent dry leaves swirling. As the craft dropped lower, settling 2 feet above the alfalfa with a grace that defied its bulk, stumbled back, his heart pounding, as barked furiously, then whimpered and fled toward the house. The craft touched down to stubby legs, extending from its baits, crushing a patch of soil with a soft hiss. The thrum-thrum spiked, vibrating through the ground into S-bones, and a wave of heat pulsed outward, wilting the plants in a perfect circle. He clutched a rake, his knuckles white, as the object sat there motionless, unblinking, its red glow pulsing rhythmically like a living thing. Quietez-vous, he shouted, his voice cracking, but the words died in the thick air, swallowed by the drone. Then, with a sharp tick-tick-tick like metal tapping, stone it lifted, wobbling slightly, and streaked upward at an angle, vanishing over the hills, toward dragging on faster than sound, leaving a faint trail of shimmering heat in the sky. Stood frozen, the silence crashing back like a wave, broken only by the wind's mournful wail and distant howls. He approached the landing site, his boots sinking into softened earth, and found a circle 6 feet across scorched black, the alfalfa within it reduced to ash. The soil steamed faintly, radiating a warmth that defied the January chill and a sour, burnt metal stench clung to the air, making him gag. Around the circle's edge, a ring of grey dust glittered, warm to the touch, unlike any frost or ash he'd known. He reported it the next day, January 9th, to the Gendarmerie Nationale in Draguignan, his voice trembling as he described the craft like a big zinc saucer and its landing. Gendarmes arrived by noon, skeptical but curious, their boots crunching on the frozen path as they inspected the site. Captain Pierre Moreau, a gruff officer with a nonsense air, noted the circle's precision, too sharp for a fire, too uniform for a prank. The soil within was hard, baked solid, and a faint tick-tick-tick lingered in the air, heard by 2 officers before fading. Samples were taken, earth ash, wilted plants sealed in bags. As watched, his hands shaking, refusing to leave the house. Gepp and France's UFO investigation unit descended on January 10th, led by engineer Jean-Jacques Velasco. They measured radiation slightly elevated and photographed the site, the circles stark against the green. Soil analysis at the University of Nancy revealed anomalies. Calcium and zinc levels spiked, traces of an unknown hydrocarbon, and a molecular structure altered as if heated to 600 degrees Celsius. Yet, nearby plants showed no burn beyond the ring. Something landed here, Velasco concluded, his report stamped unexplained physical event, a rare admission from a nation proud of its science. The aftermath crept into Trans-en-Provence like a shadow. Esgarden never recovered. The circle remained barren, its soil resisting new growth, a black scar visible from his window. The wind changed, no longer a breeze but a restless gust that carried a faint thrum-thrum on quiet nights. Heard by neighbors a kilometer away, grew skittish, barking at the sky, his fur graying early while slept fitfully, dreaming of red lights and a voice not words, but a hiss in his mind. You saw. Villagers whispered, some called it a miracle, others a curse. Old Marie, a widow who tended goats, swore she'd seen a grey shape hovering over the Var days before, silent and swift. A shepherd near grass glimpsed lights weaving above his flock that week, his sheep refusing to graze after. The wind's wail grew constant, carrying fragments, distant hums, a low moaning settling the valley. S-tractor stalled near the circle, its battery drained, and a grey dust clung to his tools, warm and stubborn, defying soap or rain. Why here? Why now? Provence held secrets, Roman ruins dotting the hills, tales of sky visitors etched in medieval lore, roused by human hands. Nearby radar stations, Cold War relics, pulsed signals into the void. A solar flare had spiked that week, bending the ionosphere. Had S presence's shout, his gaze drawn it down? Or was the craft a sentinel, watching a world too loud, too bright? Geeper speculated. A craft, not ours, its mark, a warning or a claim. By 1982, the case faded from headlines, but not from memory. Gepper's report, backed by soil data, SEG accounts circulated among ufologists. A gold standard, physical proof, no hoax. Skeptics like Philip Klass, scoffball lightning, a meteor's scorched butt. The circle's chemistry, the craft's motion, defied nature's tricks. The French government stayed mute, files sealed, while Trans-en-Provence bore the scar. Aged fast, his hair whitening, his hands trembling as he avoided the garden. Moving to Nice by 85, haunted by that tick-tick-tick in his sleep. The circle endured, photographed in 91, still barren, a warm patch in winter. In 2025, a hiker found a new mark nearby, smaller, scorched, with that grey dust unreal, ported but whispered. The wind in Provence wails, still, a drone beneath it, a presence lingering in the hills, watching from a sky that never speaks. The Claws of the River. October 11th, 1973. Draped the Pascagoula River in southern Mississippi with a humid, moonless gloom. The air hung thick with the briny scent of brackish water and the musk of wet cypress. The night alive with the buzz of mosquitoes and the croak of bullfrogs along the muddy banks. Charles Hickson, a 42-year-old shipyard worker with a weathered face and steady hands, cast his fishing line into the dark current, his boots sinking into the silt. Beside him, Calvin Parker, a wiry 19-year-old fresh from the Gulf Coast's back roads, baited his hook, his nervous chatter cutting through the stillness. The two had fished here before a quiet spot near the old Chopita shipyard, the river's surface rippling under a faint breeze. Around 9 p.m., the wind shifted, warm gust turning cold and sharp, whistling through the reeds with a high, keening edge that made Charles pause. The frogs fell silent mid-croak, the mosquitoes vanished, and a hush gripped the riverbank, broken only by the lap of water against the shore. Then came the sound, a low, resonant thrum-thrum, pulsing from the sky, vibrating through the mud into their bones. Calvin dropped his pole, his eyes wide. "You hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling as the drone grew louder, rattling their tackle box. The air thickened with a sour, metallic tang like rusted iron and ozone that stung their nostrils. Charles glanced upward, his heart thudding, and saw it. A blue light, pulsating irregularly, descending from the west over the river. It resolved into a craft oval 30 feet long, its surface a dull grey that swallowed the starlight, glowing faintly blue along its edges. It hovered 10 feet above the water, silent save for that thrum-thrum, its bulk casting a shadow that darkened the ripples below. The wind howled now, a shrieking wail that bent the cypresses and sent waves crashing against the bank, as a hatch slid open with a sharp hiss, spilling a blinding light onto the shore. 3 figures emerged, 5 feet tall, their bodies rigid, floating inches above the ground. Their skin was grey, wrinkled like an elephant's hide, their heads bulbous with no necks, no ears, just slits for mouths and noses. Their eyes were small, dark, unblinking pits, but their arms long, ending in massive, crab-like claws napped with a faint "What in God's name?" Charles rasped, grabbing Calvin's arm to run, but the light pinned them, a cold beam that numbed their legs, locking them in place. The figures glided closer, their claws clicking rhythmically, and seized them Charles by the shoulders, Calvin by the waist, lifting them effortlessly as they thrashed, their screams swallowed by the drone. They awoke inside, weightless, drifting upward into a chamber bathed in a harsh, white glow. The air was sterile, thick with a stench ammonia and decay, like a swamp gone soured, burned their lungs. Charles hung suspended, his arms outstretched, while Calvin floated beside him, his face pale, his breath ragged. The walls curved seamlessly, metallic and smooth, pulsing with veins of blue light that snaked upward into a ceiling lost in haze. The thrum-thrum-thrum was deafening now, a relentless pulse that shook their skulls, and a new sound joined it, a high-pitched whir-whir-whir, like a dentist's drill spinning in the void. The beings surrounded them three, their claws snapping, tick, tick, tick. Their faces loomed close, those pit-like eyes unblinking, reflecting Charles's terror back at him. One raised a claw, its tips parting to reveal a glowing probe-thin, needle-like, humming with a faint green light. It pressed against Charles's chest, not piercing, but scanning, sending a jolt of cold that arced through his nerves. He gasped, his body rigid, as a voice hissed in his mind, not words, but a sensation. "You are measured." Calvin whimpered as another being hovered over him, a claw-wielding, a floating, orbeg-sized, metallic worry as it darted across his skin, pausing at his eyes, his mouth, his spine. "Get off me," Charles roared, but the sound died, trapped in the thick air. A third figure approached, its claw snapping shut with a sharp clack, and injected him with a gel-cold, oily, stinging his arm. His vision blurred, images flooding in, the river burning, the sky splitting, his own body floating, lifeless in this room. Visions or threats, he couldn't tell. Calvin sobbed, the orb hovering over his face. Its whir drilling into his ears as the beings tilted their heads in unison, observing, cataloguing, their claws clicking like a metronome of dread. The examination stretched minutes, hours, the light intensifying, the drone morphing into a shriek of wind that wasn't wind, tearing at their senses. Through a slit in the wall, Charles glimpsed the outside. The river below, stars too bright, too close, spiraling in patterns no human sky could hold. Then it stopped. The beings retreated, their claws snapping one last tick-tick-tick, and the light released them, dropping them through a void of shadow and glare. They hit the riverbank hard mud, reeds, the night air flooding back, warm and humid. The craft loomed overhead, its blue glow fading, then streaked upward, vanishing over the gulf with a final thrum-thrum that rippled the water. Charles staggered to his knees, his shirt torn, his arm burning where the gel had touched. Calvin curled into a ball, trembling, his eyes wide and vacant. Their watches read 9:20 p.m., 20 minutes gone, yet it felt like hours. They stumbled to the sheriff's office in Pascagoula, their voices hoarse as they spilled their taillights. Claws, a floating hell. Deputies found them shaken, their clothes damp with sweat and mud, a grey dust clinging to their boots, warm and gritty. The riverbank bore no tracks, but the reeds were bent, the air heavy with that metallic temps days later. A secret tape, recorded during their debrief, captured their terror Charles's, steady recounting, Calvin's broken, subscripted, raw. Doctors examined them burns on Charles's arm, radiation traces on Calvin's skin, no drugs, no lies. Polygraphs backed their story, baffling skeptics. The river grew quiet after fish avoided the spot. The wind carried a faint tick-tick-tick on still nights, heard by fishermen miles downstream. Charles aged fast, his hair graying, his sleep haunted by that drone, dying in 11 still swearing it was real. Calvin broke hospitalized, then reclusive his youth stolen, whispering of claws till his end in 23. Why them? The river held secrets Choctaw tales of skykin roused by water's call, Cold War radar pulsing nearby, a cosmic snare tripped by 2 men alone. Pascagoula's Mark endured a town watched, its waters whispering, its silence a lie. The Harvest of the Void. October 16th, 1957. Draped the vast fields of snow, Francisco de Sales, a sleepy farming town in Minas Gerais, Brazil, in a humid, starlit stillness. The air hung heavy with the scent of freshly turned soil and wild grasses. The night, alive with the chirps of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Antonio Mendes, a 23-year-old farmer with a lean build and calloused hands, worked late in his family's soybean field, guiding a tractor under the glow of a waxing moon. His shirt clung to his sweat-soaked back, his eyes bleary from hours of ploughing, but he pressed on harvest season, waited for no one. Around 1 a.m., the wind shifted, a warm breeze turning sharp and cold, whistling through the crops with a high, keening edge that made Antonio pause. The crickets fell silent, mid-chirp, the cattle quieted, and a hush settled over the plains, broken only by the tractor's rumble. Then he heard it, a low, resonant thrum-thrum pulsing from the sky, vibrating through the earth into the tractor's frame. The engine sputtered, its headlights flickering, and Antonio cut the power, stepping onto the soil as the drone grew louder, rattling his teeth. The air thickened with a sour, metallic tang-like burnt wiring that stung his nostrils. He glanced upward, shielding his eyes, and saw them. For lights red, unblinking, hovering low over the field, 50 meters away. They danced in a tight square, then merged into a single, blinding glow, revealing a craft egg-shaped, 10 meters long, its surface a dull silver that shimmered faintly under the stars. It descended silently, save for that thrum-thrum settling 10 feet above the soybeans, its underside pulsing red along a curved seam. Antonio's heart pounded, his hands gripping the tractor's wheel, as the wind howled a shrieking wail that bent the crops and sent dust swirling. The craft dropped lower, 3 tripod legs extending with a soft hiss, crushing a patch of plants as it landed. A hatch slid open, spilling a greenish light, and figures emerged, 4 of them, 5 feet tall, clad in tight grey suits that gleamed like wet stone. Their heads were encased in helmets, their faces obscured save for glowing slits where eyes should be. They moved with a jerky precision, their boots silent on the soil, and one raised a devicer tube emitting a faint tick-tick-tick pointing it at Antonio. "Oh, Kivos is caring," he shouted, his voice cracking, but a beam of red light shot from the tube, striking his chest, not burning, but numbing, locking his limbs as he collapsed. Antonio woke in the haze, his body heavy, sprawled on a smooth, curved table in a room bathed in a dim, greenish glow. The air was sterile, thick with a rancid stench ozone, mixed with something organic, like rotting fruit that coated his throat. His clothes were gone, replaced by a clanging film that stuck to his skin, and his arms and legs were pendant by straps, but by a force that buzzed against his flesh when he struggled. The walls arched upward, seamless and metallic, pulsing with veins of red light that snaked into a ceiling lost in shadow. The thrum-thrum was deafening now, a relentless pulse that burrowed into his skull, making his vision swim. The figures surrounded him, 5, now their helmets off, revealing bald, oversized heads and skin a pale grey, slick and hairless. Their eyes were the horror, small, black, almond-shaped, unblinking, reflecting his terrified face like dark mirrors. Their mouths were thin slits, their noses mere bumps, and their hands long. Thin fingers, ending in blunt tips, clicked softly. Tick-ticked, one leaned closer, its breath a cold mist that reeked of decay, pressing a glowing rod to his arm. A sharp pain jolted through him, not cutting, but sampling, as if tasting his blood. "Para," he gasped, but the words died, swallowed by the thick air. A voice hissed in his mind, not spoken, but felt, a buzzing chorus that clawed at his thoughts. "You are chosen." His stomach dropped as they smeared a gel-cold oilio across his chest, its stench burning his lungs. Then the door slid open, and she entered, a female, taller, her skin a bluish grey, her eyes larger, glowing faintly red. Her hair was sparse, platinum, framing a face both human and alien, her lips parted in a silent snarl. She wore nothing, her form lithe yet unnerving, and the others stepped back, their claws clicking in unison, as if in reverence. Antonio thrashed, his heart hammering, but the restraints tightened. She climbed atop the table, her movements fluid, her eyes locked on his, piercing, predatory. "No, per favor," he begged, but the voice returned. "You give." Her skin was cold, her touch electric, and the act forced mechanical, felt like a violation beyond flesh, a merging he couldn't escape. The room pulsed faster, the red veins flaring, and the drone morphed into a shrieker wind that tore at his ears, carrying his own muffled cries, distorted and alien. Time blurred minutes, hours, until she withdrew, her eyes narrowing, a faint nod to the others. They injected him with a needle sharp, burning, and the restraints vanished. Antonio slumped, gasping, as a hatch opened, sliding him through a chute of light and shadow. He hit the ground, hard damp soil, soybean stalks, the night air flooding back, warm and familiar. The craft loomed overhead, its lights flaring red, then streaked upward, vanishing over the horizon with a final tick-tick-tick that faded into the stars. He staggered home, shirtless, his skin scratched and bruised, reaching his farmhouse at 4:30 a.m., 3 hours gone. His family found him collapsed, babbling about grey men, and a woman with red eyes. The field bore a scar, a 6-meter circle, scorched black, the soil baked hard, radiating heat days later. A grey dust clung to his tractor, warm and stubborn, and his skin burned with welts, chemical rashes, doctors later said, from an unknown compound. Antonio reported it on October 20th to Dr. Olavo Fontes, a Rio physician, his voice trembling as he recounted the craft, the beings, the encounter details too vivid for delirium. Radiation lingered on his skin, his blood showed odd proteins, and the field's soil defied analysis, spiked with zinc, altered at a molecular level. Brazil's military investigated, their files sealed, while locals whispered of sky devils roused by the tractor's rumble or a farmer's lone presence under the stars. He never recovered. Nightmares of red eyes plagued him, his health faltered, dying at 55 in 1992, haunted by that thrum. The circle stayed barren, a warm patch in winter and on quiet nights. San Francisco wind wilder. Drone beneath it, a presence watching from the plains, waiting for another to call. Why, Antonio? Rural tales spoke of star-kin-seeking airs, Cold War signals piercing the sky, or a cosmic test sparked by human noise. His story backed by burns, soil, consistency stunned, ufologists, baffled skeptics claiming hypnosis or lustful delusion. The truth remained a scar, a violation etched in earth and flesh, a harvest no one could reap. The sulfur shadows of Varganha. January 13th, 1996. Dawned humid and overcast in Varganha, a modest coffee-producing town in Minas Gerais, Brazil. Its streets lined with whitewashed homes and its fields stretching toward rolling hills. The air carried the earthy scent of roasted beans and damp soil, a faint breeze rustling the eucalyptus trees as the town stirred with its usual rhythm vendors calling out, radios crackling with samba, the hum of daily life. Carlos Zisosa, 34-year-old mechanic with a curious streak, drove his battered Fiat along a dirt road near his workshop, the sky above a grey veil hinting at rain. At 8 a.m., the wind shifted a sluggish gust, turning sharp and biting, whistling through the hills with a high, keening edge that prickled Carlos's skin. The birds fell silent, their songs snuffed out, and a low, resonant thrum pulsed from the sky, vibrating through his car's frame. The engine coughed, its dashboard lights flickering, and he pulled over, stepping onto the road as the drone grew louder, rattling his chest. The air thickened with a stench, sulfur, sharp and rancid, like rotten eggs laced with ammonia that forced him to cover his nose with his shirt, his eyes watering. He squinted upward and saw it, a cigar-shaped object, the size of a school bus. Its surface a crumpled silver, leaking white smoke from a gash in its side. It wobbled, tilting like a wounded bird, descending slowly over a field a kilometer away. Avião apuros Carlos Matadan airplane, in trouble grabbing binoculars from his glove box. The craft jerked, fighting to stay aloft, then crashed with a muted thud, kicking up dust and flattening grass. The thrum spiked, then died, replaced by a shrieking wail in the wind that bent the trees and sent a shiver down his spine. Carlos sped toward the site, his tires skidding on gravel, arriving at a hill overlooking a small white farmhouse. He stumbled out, the sulfur stench overwhelming, and saw debris in. aluminum-like shards scattered across the field, glinting oddly under the grey sky. He picked up a piece, light as paper. It crumpled in his hand, then sprang back to its shape, warm to the touch. Que diabos é isso? He whispered, his voice trembling. When the wind carried a new sound, a faint tick-ticked like claws on stone, echoing from the wreckage. Before he could move closer, engines roared behind him, military trucks from the nearby ESA army base, 30 kilometers away, barreling down the road. Soldiers in olive fatigues leaped out, rifles raised, their shouts sharp. Sayadakwi, Agora. They shoved Carlos back, his protests drowned by the wind's wail. As they cordoned off the field, their radios crackling with urgency, a helicopter buzzed overhead, its blades slicing the air, and within minutes, Varjanha's quiet morning dissolved into chaos. By noon, whispers spread through the town something had crashed, something not human. At 3:30 p.m., 3 girls, Liliane Silva, 14, Valkyria Silva, 16, and Katia Andrade, 22, cut through a vacant lot near Jardim Anda, their laughter fading as the wind carried that sulfur stench again, stronger now, knee-weakening. A stray dog trailing them growled low, then bolted. Lillian froze, pointing. Olha lá. Crouched against a wall, half hidden by weeds, was a creature 4 feet tall, its skin a slick, oily brown, veined with dark streaks, its head oversized, crowned with 3 blunt horns, its eyes huge, red, glowing like embers locked on them, unblinking, its limbs rubbery and trembling. O diabo, screamed, her voice cracking as the creature swayed, its slit of a mouth parting to emit a faint tick-tick-tick. The stench hit harder sulfur and rot, a wave that buckled their legs and they ran, sobbing, to Lillian's mother, Louisa, who dragged them inside, slamming the door as the wind howled outside, carrying that drone, that wail. Não era humano, Katia gasped, her hands shaking. Era outra coisa. Hours later, at dusk, Aurelina de Fatima, a farmer's wife near the crash site, glimpsed another roar, the same creature staggering through her yard, its red eyes dim, its body unsteady, as if injured. She clutched her rosary, whispering prayers as it vanished into the brush, leaving a trail of flattened grass and that unbearable stink. The wind shrieked louder, a banshee's cry that rattled her windows, and the thrum-thrum-thrum pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the dark. By nightfall, Varganha was a fortress. Military trucks blockaded streets. Firemen under army command swept the town, their faces pale behind masks. Marco Cherez, a 23-year-old military policeman, joined the hunt near the lot where the girls had fled. At 10 p.m., he radioed in, his voice tight. Eu peguei, vivo. Witnesses later claimed he'd grabbed a creature, bare-handed doily, wriggling, its skin slick with a greasy film, shoving it into a canvas sack as it thrashed weakly, its teek-teek-teek muffled. The stench clung to him, sulfur and decay, and he gagged, his hands trembling as soldiers rushed it to a truck bound for Humanetta's hospital. At the hospital, an anonymous orderly later, dubbed Military X, saw it unfold. A stainless steel table, a box, doctors in hazmat suits, circling a body, small, grey-brown, its red eyes dull, its skin glistening with oil. Parecia assustado, he whispered to filmmakers years later, like it was scared of us. Clipboards scribbled, machines beeped, and the air reeked sulfur, so thick it burned their lungs. The creature was carted off, destination unknown, some said the ESA base. Others camp in a Sunda armed escort, the wind's wail masking its departure. Marco fell ill days later, fever, rashes, an infection no antibiotic could touch. By February, he was dead. 23, his autopsy sealed, his family silenced. The creature's touch, they whispered, had cursed him. The crash site bore scars, a 20-meter swath of scorched earth, warm weeks later, littered with that grey dust, defying analysis. Soil samples showed zinc spikes, radiation traces, and a molecular shift no fire could explain. The wind never settled, carrying a faint thrum-thrum over virginous hills, heard by farmers miles away. Animals, sickened cows, refused to graze. Dogs howled at the sky, and the sulfur stench lingered in pockets, a ghost in the air. The Brazilian army dismissed it. The creature was Medinho, a local mute, dirty from rain, mistaken in panic. The trucks, routine maintenance. The death, coincidence. Yet the girls held firm oily skin, red eyes. No human could match hand. Carlos swore the craft was no plane, its debris alive in his hands. Witnesses faced threat soldiers at their doors. Voices low, fique quieto, or else. Vargina's silence was bought, but its scars spoke. Why Varginha, Minas Gerais, whispered of skykin in old tales, beings roused by human noise, drawn by coffee fields or Cold War radar pulsing nearby. The crash accident or summons left a mark. A water tower shaped like a disc rose downtown. Bus stops mimicked ships. Tourism boomed. Yet the wind wailed on, a drone beneath it, a presence watching from the plains. In 2025, moment of contact reignited the tale witnesses like Carlos and the girls, now women, unyielding. Military exes hushed confession. No video, but rumors of film locked away. Ufologists hailed it physical traces. Egypt terror while skeptics scoffed. Mass hysteria, a downed balloon. The sulfur, the speed, the death defied their shrugs. Varginha remains Brazil's enigma town marked. Its sky a question, its silence a scream.